experience that I learnt that the system is as bad, if not worse, than when I was in care myself. We've been travelling through New South Wales, and we're here in Canberra, and we invite everyone tomorrow, which is the anniversary of the right apology to the stolen generations, to join with us, starting at the Tent Embassy at Old Government House at 12 o'clock. Australian governments are forcibly removing more children per head of population than any other Western nation. The statistics are all outlined on the banner down there, and this is not a title to be proud of. This is one of great shame, causing immense harm and trauma to vulnerable children and families that will impact for the rest of their lives and into future generations. Worldwide evidence for best practice proves that forced removal of children and forced adoptions do not ensure a safe, stable and loving home for life for vulnerable children, and the outcomes are far better for children, families and society when they are supported to remain safely at home, and it's far cheaper in the long run. But sadly, Australia copied the failed United States and United Kingdom systems whereby they grab a child and run with that child and place that child with strangers, and family, particularly extended family in many cases, never get to see that child again. Just one case example in the disgraceful, inhumane decisions made by this Canberra office. We've got a maternal grandmother that had custody of one of her grandsons and then assumed care of another grandson who was a brother to the grandchild who was already in her care. The brothers were loved, happy, safe and well cared for by their grandmother. A few months later, this office decided to remove one of the grandsons for no good reason at all and placed him hundreds of kilometres away in another state, far away from all whom he knew and loved. He was placed with distant relatives from the father's side of the family. But he didn't know these relatives until the department decided to place him there. Since tearing this child away from his grandmother and brother over 2.5 years ago and severing the strong and loving bonds they had, this office has failed to arrange any contact visits at all, and the grandmother has only been allowed one phone call in all that time. About 2 weeks ago, this grandmother requested a meeting to be arranged with this office for yesterday so that I could attend and support to try and advocate in the hope that we could reach an agreement for contact in the best interest of these brothers. But this office refused to meet with us. Shame on this disgraceful office who only talk about family preservation, but in practice, like so many others, they have ripped this family apart and traumatised them for life. At the very least, we ask this office to urgently arrange contact visits for these brothers and grandmother who are traumatised by their grief and loss. This office has a habit of taking children, retaining them on orders in the ACT, and then dumping these children over the border out of reach. No one should have the power to take children from their family by force with armed police when they've not committed any crimes and without evidence. No one should have the power to forcibly remove children. Forced removals are still happening as a first resort with no investigation taking place, no warnings to parents and no help or support offered. Forcibly removing children is the most drastic, costly and intrusive act the government can carry out. And if you have any doubts at all that children are being stolen in this country on a daily basis, I urge you to go to the current Senate inquiry into children in out-of-home care website and read submission number 27, written by a solicitor, one of the few who actually has tried to defend parents for the past 6 years. It describes exactly how children are stolen in the secret care courts due to the perverted interpretation and application of the care and protection legislation where no evidence at all is required. Legal aid solicitors are underfunded for care and protection matters, resulting in inadequate or at times no legal defence for parents by their appointed solicitors. In most cases, these legal aid solicitors pressure parents to consent without admissions, using emotional blackmail by informing parents they can't win against the departments, and if they try to fight them, they'll never see their children again. This deceptive and immoral practice must be stopped, because once they've consented without admissions, it's virtually impossible to ever get their children back. A recent trend is emerging where parents actually qualify for legal aid, but then have their grant refused on the grounds that the case has absolutely no merit. So traumatised parents are forced to try and defend themselves against Crown lawyers with unlimited government funds because an office clerk has prejudged their case, and that is not justice. Appeals are not funded by legal aid, and nor are most applications for restoration, so the children of the poor and the marginalised are stolen for the term of their childhood because parents can't afford a decent lawyer. Sadly, our governments have failed to learn the painful and destructive lessons of the past and have rapidly escalated the rate of child stealing in the last decade on the ludicrous probability that it's better to take a child because they might suffer a risk of harm at some time in the future if left with family, while at the same time failing to acknowledge the far greater evidence harm to children that are forcibly removed and placed in care, especially with strangers. Saying sorry for past failures is meaningless, while children are still being stolen. Death and abuse of children in care are still happening at alarming rates and still being covered up in Australia's multi-billion-dollar child protection industry that caters to the whims of profiteering stakeholders, not our children, and certainly not their families. There is no transparency or accountability with child protection departments that refuse to publish data, and this sets the example for the NGOs and continues the cover-ups that have always been a part of the secret child protection industry, as evidenced daily in the current Royal Commission. These departments must be forced by law to publish the data of children who are abused and die in their care, including the alarming suicide rate of children and their parents torn apart and destroyed by the current alienating tactics used by child protection workers. Child abuse does not discriminate. It is found in every class of society: domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health issues, disability, emotional, physical, sexual abuse, and even neglect span all classes of Australian society. But it's only the marginalised, the disadvantaged and the poorer classes, including the homeless, that have their children forcibly removed, because the rich can afford to buy justice. Deborah Lee Furness has announced several times last month that 11,000 babies were removed from their mothers last year in Australia. These alarming figures show that supply is underway for the well-off childless couples that would want other people's children, and so is another stolen generation. We need laws that ensure no newborn babies can be forcibly removed from maternity units without a court hearing attended by both parties and evidence of abuse and neglect. The decision to remove a child, and especially a newborn baby, must be made by a magistrate after a hearing of evidence, not by caseworkers as is happening now. We now have babies being taken from maternity wards and placed under 18-year orders in less than 50 days in this nation, with no defence afforded to parents. The forced adoption agenda is being spread around the nation by the rich, powerful and influential childless couples that want other people's children. Forced adoption is now legal in New South Wales and a first priority for children in care. Currently, the ACT does not have the destructive mandated forced adoption legislation that New South Wales has, so they've been sending their children in out-of-home care across the border to have them forcibly adopted in New South Wales. The latest propaganda is the concept that open adoption will make it all okay. Well, Deborah Lee Furness is a good example of how open adoption is abused. She procured her oldest adopted son from the child protection system in the United States of America on an open adoption contract, and broke all the rules by her own admission in an interview with Andrew Denton. Just 1 year after the adoption of her son, Deborah Lee Furness violated that open adoption contract. She cut her son's mother off completely. His mother, like so many others before and since her, committed suicide, arguably caused by the grief and loss of her son and the selfishness of the adoptive parent who wanted someone else's child all to themselves. Just like Deborah Lee Furness closed her open adoption after 1 year, so will others, because the adoptive parents hold all the power. And it's not about the children, it's about the infertile people wanting a child of their own. You just have to view any of the pro-adoption chat rooms to evidence that. We already have long-term guardianship orders, which provide all the security a child needs in a loving home if they can't be restored to families. Adoption only serves those that can't have children of their own. There is no legal definition for the best interests of the child in state and territory jurisdictions. This term was first used by Adolf Hitler for his own master eugenics plan. This term is now used and abused to mean whatever the dominant and powerful want it to mean. Until the forced removal of children by the state and territory governments is a fair and just process based on evidence, no child should be stolen, and most certainly no child in care should be forcibly adopted when they have families who love them fighting for their return. Australia has had more than 80 inquiries into children in state and territory care in the past 160 years. All have evidenced that the system is a failure, but most of the recommendations were never implemented to fix the failures. We are hopeful that the current Senate inquiry into out-of-home care will have a better result. Only 2 submissions have had any media attention from the nearly 100 published so far on the inquiry website. Most advocate